Peter and I have been developing proposals together for Therap, or working together for a couple of years now, and we're just commenting on how rapidly things have changed over that very short period of time in terms of what some of our potential customers are expecting.
And, I think for those of us that have been in the DDID field for a long period of time, we've kind of experienced a privileged state within states where the agencies have gotten a lot of attention and a lot of priorities, but there's this trend across the country in really the last 5 or 6 years where the DDID agencies are being subsumed into other agencies, and you kind of see this consolidation of long-term supports where all disability groups are kind of getting put into one silo, and kind of the DD world is losing its identity.
Right, and this sort of specialized thing that we had that was clever and useful for the agency and maybe improved efficiency and was really a nice thing to buy is now more of a requirement and comes at the behest of some outside group that they don't even know very well, and they're a little sometimes nervous in even knowing how to write the specifications.
It's kind of interesting. We've been working on an RFP around the TEF grants, which are kind of coming out of the electronic long-term services and support world out of CMS. And verbally, they talk and give all sorts of accolades to the DD world about how person-centered we are, and how they'd like to emulate that in the larger disability community. But when you look at the grants, they tend to be still very medicalized and very difficult for people to access. I know one of the things that they want in these grants is for individual consumers and individuals to be able to access their own electronic health record. And we actually kind of cited Therap that we have individuals and we have family members that have been using and utilize Therap on a regular basis, but you really need to make sure that it's tailored so that it's easily utilized and accessible. And that's something that they just don't seem to kind of have grasped yet.
No, they're still at the one size fits all until they find out that it doesn't. Some people have obviously severe communications limitations or have funding sources that are requiring them to have a plan that has a sign-off by a large number of people in a circle of supports. And the way these things are envisioned, there's not really an easy way to do that.
Yeah, I think one of the kind of the stumbling blocks they have is that they assume that they're going to kind of create a portal, and that a recipient or a consumer of waiver services is just going to be able to go to that portal and manipulate and utilize it kind of independently. Whereas in our world, most of the people that are supported across the country, and you're talking millions of people, most of those folks have some type of guardian, they have some type of designated health proxy or conservator. And when we've kind of raised the issue of what kind of allowances are there going to be made for those individuals to be access the system, because a lot of our folks aren't going to be able to access the system. They seem to be almost surprised that even existed and hadn't even thought about it, that other people might need to have access to that information besides the individual.
Correct, and the image of the person on the waiver is somebody who's living independently and maybe receiving Meals on Wheels, but I don't think those are actually the people who are getting waiver services, and their needs are more complex, and the number of people involved in safeguarding their rights are more complex as well, and it hasn't been figured out yet.
One observation that I've had about Therap is that for new agencies that are kind of looking at it, that we're in a very traditional paper-based system, and there's still a lot of those organizations out there, as well as a lot of organizations in healthcare in general that are paper-driven, that a lot of the administrative or board folks have a lot of trepidation because they don't have confidence in their staff that they can make the kind of the crossover from that paper traditional system to an electronic system. And I know for this, I'm on the board of a small agency, and we went to Therap, and there was some concern among board members that, well, you know, the staff just aren't going to be able to manage this kind of leap in technology. And one of the folks on the board said, well, if you look at all of our staff, everybody's got a tablet, everybody's got a cell phone. You know, people, the new generation of folks are really able to kind of make that transition easily. So, you know, the one thing that I hear it every once in a while at some of the conferences from the people that aren't into Therap yet, that are just kind of here to, you know, kind of learn and listen, that it's a lot easier done, I think, than they think it is, and their staff are much more predisposed, you know, for Therap. So I think that's a big, you know, a big change. The other thing I think that hasn't changed is this whole idea around person centeredness. You know, I started in the mid 60s in the institutional model, and they were just starting what they called then institutional reform. They weren't even into closure yet. But one of the first things that they started to do when they were looking at institutional reform was they looked at goal-centered planning was a big wave, and that every individual had to have a plan and a goal plan. So if you go back, you know, almost
more than 50 years,
more than 50 years ago, that basic little it was a one-page plan that everybody in the hospital had to have, but it had strengths and weaknesses and goals were on the one page. So, you know, in some ways, we've changed tremendously. In other ways, you got to remember we're still focused on individual people is what it's all about. And I think because the world has become so complex, especially around health care, and there's so many more dimensions to life that are captured now for people with DD. You know, Therap really, you know, I know we have one of those graphs where kind of the individuals in the middle, and you have kind of all the domains and all those things around them. Therap, I think, is a pretty unique tool that still maintains the integrity of the person, but manages all that information. So that's the major, the major change.
And I think back in the 60s and early 70s, we were naive and we thought all you had to do was transfer that little bit of information about the person on that one-page plan, and services would go from being institutional to individualized. And it's taken all this time to realize it's a lot more complicated than that. And I think that was revolutionary, but to have it really impact on almost all individuals now has taken this long. And it really is, even though it's the same idea, now it actually works and gives people a much higher quality of life.
Well, you know, and I think the other mistake that was made was that, you know, the paper from that one piece, it just kept on being added as the systems improved and you started to look at more things for people to do, that the information really became unmanageable. And that, you know, team members, unless they were able, I can remember our medical records room kind of at the end of this institutional reform movement, when you asked for a client record for a team meeting, it used to come in a shopping cart from the grocery store that they'd borrowed. And it was paper that basically was mountains of it, but useless. So, and sharing it among team members was impossible. And today it's really a virtual a discussion that goes on. Everybody has access to the same information at the same time and connect. So I mean, you're really talking about a sea change, in terms of that, and Therap kind of brings that. The other thing I think is when they talk about, the electronic health record, and everybody's going to be connected, and hospitals are going to share, and doctors and other therapists. I think in reality, kind of some of the examples that Tom talked about, personal experiences with your local health practitioners. The idea and the theory and practice, I think, is almost non-existent in this country. And if you look at Therap, the practice is reality. The theory was moved to practice, and that all of this energy and money around creating these kind of health networks of information. I don't think any of them are actually operational to the point of view that the information is moving back and forward. And Therap's basically been doing it for 10, 11 years now. So.
And thinking about that shopping cart, which sounds like a metaphor, but it's actually the truth. Not only was it not usable, but if there was a mistake somewhere, there was no way to correct the mistake. And if you found it in one place, you wouldn't find it in 40 more places. But there was also impossible to keep things confidential from one person and another, because you started spreading the folders out on the table and looking for this and looking for that, and you might find out about people's health status, things that you wouldn't want other people to know, and it was absolutely impossible to keep any integrity in that process. And we're certainly in a different place with Therap, where you can do that.